皆さんこんにちは。ジャーナリストの津田大介です。通常は夜にやっているポリタス TV なんですけれども、この6月から、毎週火曜木曜日の、お昼正午からですね、ポリタス TV、お昼の番組、通称ヒルタスなんて言ってますけれども、ヒルタスもお届けしております。ポリタス TV、まずはですね、YouTube のメンバーシップにもご登録いただければと思います。こちらご登録いただくと、昼と夜の番組、過去のアーカイブ、どんどん増えてますけれども、こちらがいつでも好きな時に見放題になります。上位プランもありまして、上位プランにアップグレードいただくと、上位プラン向けの限定動画も見られます。皆さんぜひご登録、アップグレードいただき、番組継続のため、ご協力よろしくお願いいたします。はい、この6月からですね、ポリタス TV3 周年のね、企画として、新しく10人の、MC をお迎えして、お昼版のポリタス TV ヒルタスをですね、お届けしてるんですけれども、これまで、9人の MC の方紹介してきましたが、今日ついに最後、10人目の MC をご紹介します。10人目の MC はアンナさんです。よろしくお願いします。
よろしくお願いします。
はい、アンナさんはですね、もともと僕ツイッターを、何かのきっかけでツイートが目に入って、面白いこと書いてるなと思ってフォローして、いつの間にかいつか相互フォローになっていて、ツイッターとかでちょっとしたやり取りはあったんですけれども、ご本人はですね、ミックスルーツで、アメリカ人と日本人のご両親を持っていてですね、法律と社会学をやってきて、イギリスの大学で修士号を取って、現在は仕事をしつつ、研究の道も続けてらっしゃるというですね、そういう方です。で、ツイッターでのつながりはあったんですけれども、実際に会ったこととかはなくて、でもなんかこのヒルタスを始めようかなと思った時に、割とかなり早い段階でこの方に MC をお願いしようかなっていうのは思ったんですよね。そのきっかけというのが、もう多分1年以上前だったと思いますけど、アンナさんがですね、ツイッターで参加してたあるスペースがあったんですよね。それはまさに何ていうかジェンダーとかのことを話すスペースだったんだけれども、どちらかというと結構ですね、何ていうか性的役割分業的なものにですね、何ていうか、それを肯定するような男性が集まっているようなスペースで、いやそれはちょっとやっぱり違うんですよっていうことをですね、何ていうかもうほとんどアンナさんが一人ですね、全然違う立場でその場に乗り込んでいってというか、そこで話をしていて、でも全くね価値観が違う男性、それこそなんかねアンナさんの言ってることが全然理解できないと、それに対してなんか感情的にもうなんか声を荒げて反論するような男性なんかも結構いるような、もう僕は普通にそれを視聴者として聞いてたんですけど、なんか今日聞いてて本当に辛くなって出てくるようなスペースがあったんですけれども、でもそういう中でも全然アンナさんがですね声を荒げることもなく、本当に理性的に、できるだけ届く言葉は何かなっていうのを探しながら説得というかお話しされてるのを見て、この人に MC をお願いしたらなんかポリタス TV も良い番組が作れるんじゃないかなっていうふうに思って、その時にちょっと DM でやり取りして、いずれちょっと女性の MC とかお願いしたいんですっていうことでやり取りをして、今回ですね6月にまたお願いしてお引き受けいただいたというのが経緯ですね。なので、今後、それぞれのね、10人、MC、本当に個性豊かなんですけれども、アンナさんには、ご本人の、法律だったり、社会学だったり、ご専門だとか、関心分野、あるいは、ミックスルーツの方々も多分そうだと思うんですけど、やっぱり社会にね、本当にいろんなマイノリティの人たちがいて、そういうマイノリティの人たちが抱えている悩みって、どうしても、マジョリティである我々にはですね、やっぱ不可視化されてて見えにくいというところがあって、そういう問題なんかをですね、いろんなテーマで、いろんな人にインタビューをしてもらおうかなと思ってます。そして何よりね、アンナさん、英語もネイティブでいらっしゃるので、ポリタス TV もですね、やっぱグローバル化が必要だろうということで、英語圏の人にインタビューできると、これまで以上に本当に幅広く、いろんな問題提起ができるのじゃないかなと思って、そのあたりもですね、期待をしています。ということで、ちょっと長くなっちゃいましたけれども、アンナさん、じゃあ改めて自己紹介と、この番組 MC にこんなことやりたいという意気込みを教えていただければ。
はい。 ご紹介預かりました。アンナと申します。本当におっしゃっているように、9人の、とても素晴らしい MC の方々と、ちょっと私なんかが肩を並べていいのかなと、大変恐縮しているのですが、せっかくいただいた機会なので、楽しく、けれど学びもある場にしていけたらなというふうに思っております。特にですね、私もこれまで、ツイッター上だと、ジェンダーに関わる問題のことが多かったかなと思うんですが、それに限らず社会問題において日本語圏と英語圏の言語の格差っていうのをすごく感じる部分が多かったので、このような機会をいただいて、その格差を自分のできる範囲で少しでも狭められたらなというふうに思っております。はい、なのでちょっとなかなかこういった経験がないものですからご指導いただくことも多いのかと思いますけれども、皆様と共に成長していけたらなというふうに思っております。どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。
ありがとうございます。ちなみに、ここまでね、ご覧いただいた方お気づきかと思いますけれども、アンナさんは顔出しはしないということで。でもはい、10人のね、MC の中で、笛美さんも顔出ししなくて、なんかやっぱり僕自身、いろんなところで言ってるんですけど、やっぱりどんどんこの報道番組の MC に女性が増えていけばいいと思うんですよね。でも MC ってよく考えてみたらものすごくやっぱり男性的な仕事だなって感じることもすごく多くて、だからなんか女性がどんどんやっぱり増えていけばいいんだなとは思う一方で、ただやっぱり女性が前に出てやっていくと、そのこと自体がいろんな、ルッキズムだったりとか、いろんなものにやっぱり大変なところにさらされたりもするっていう時に、やっぱりちゃんと安全な状況で、きちんと内容にはね責任を持った上で、じゃあ顔出しも別に本名も出さなくてもきちんと社会的責任を取って報道番組って別にあり得るよなというふうに思って、そういう意味では顔を出さない方が2人今回の CMC にいるっていうことも、これも一つのなんか多様性かなというふうに思っているので、ぜひですね、臆せずいろいろんな番組を作っていただければなというふうに思っております。はい、そして、1人目ですね、このアンナさんの記念すべき初 MC1 回目はですね、もういきなりっていうわけではないんですけれども、英語圏、英語の著者の方にですねインタビューすることになりました。日本はですね7月の21日に発売されます、太田出版から発売されます射精責任、ガブリエル・ブレアさんというですね本の射精責任、今ツイッターでねかなり話題になっている本が発売されるんですが、この著者ガブリエル・ブレアさんにアンナさんが本の内容をもとにですねいろいろインタビューをね掘り葉掘りインタビューしていただくということで、僕も非常にこの内容を楽しみにしておりますので、なかなかねこういう話題の本が著者にねその英語で直接インタビューっていうのはなかなかないものだと思いますので、ぜひ皆さん楽しんでいただければなと思います。では、僕はここで消えますので、ここから先はアンナさんにバトンをお渡しします。よろしくお願いします。
はい、よろしくお願いいたします。All right, so today we're welcoming Miss Gabrielle Blair, who is an author of Ejaculate Responsibly. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Before I get started, I would like to quickly give an introduction to our Japanese audience and give you some background of you and your wonderful book. So if that's okay, I'll go ahead and get started.
Of course.
はい、今日はですね、射精責任の著者であるガブリエル・ブレアさんをお迎えしています。で、簡単に彼女のプロフィールを紹介したいと思います。彼女の著書、射精責任はニューヨークタイムズのベストセラーにも選定されており、もともとはデザインマム .com という育児ブログから始まっておられまして、当ブログはタイム誌やウォールストリートジャーナルでも取り上げられ、様々な賞を受賞しております。で、現在彼女はフランスノルマンディーに住み、1600年代に建てられた古民家をリノベ中ということで、はい、今日は彼女の方からたくさんのこの本についてお話を伺えることを楽しみにしております。Okay, so that was the proper introduction. If you want to kind of give a hello to our Japanese audience.
Hello, I'm so glad to be here. I'm very excited that the book is coming out in Japanese.
And yes, we're very excited as well. And before we get started on our discussion, as you did in your book, I would like to add that this book and essentially our conversation today will be held from a cis het perspective. So that is a quickly reminder to our audience, as you and I both, I believe, are cis het individuals. So. Okay, so as a beginning of this conversation, since many of our audiences have not read your book yet, as it's coming out in July 21st, Japan time. By the way, congratulations on your translation.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to share some of the quotes that I found to be intriguing from your book, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Sure. Okay, so I think the first quote, I think, is one of the most popular, I would say, quote from your book. And I would like, if that's okay with you, could you read it out loud for me? Can you see
Absolutely.
the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Men cause, sorry, I'll do it again.
Yes.
Men cause all unwanted pregnancies. We put the burden, sorry, one more time, I just blocked. Men cause all unwanted pregnancies. We've put the burden of pregnancy prevention on the person who is fertile 24 hours a month instead of the person who is fertile 24 hours a day, every day of their life.
Right. I think, if I read this, we can totally understand this is just basic science. And as a female individual myself, I live this every day as I go through my menstrual cycle. But when written out like this, I think I'm kind of shocked at myself of how alarmed I am of this fact. And I'm sure you've gotten similar reactions from many of your readers. And how do you feel that so many of us are so shocked by this just simple biological fact?
Yeah, it's been really fascinating because there is nothing in the book that is like new science or some, newly discovered fact. We are really talking about simple biological facts. We're talking about cause and effect. The arguments are so simple,
Right.
but we haven't ever thought of the things like this. And some people will say, are you frustrated at men that they're, haven't taken more of the responsibility here? And I say, how can I be frustrated? I didn't even think of these ideas as a woman until I'd had 6 babies, and my husband had had a vasectomy for, I think like 8 years before I had even thought of these ideas. So if they haven't occurred to me, who's dealing with the burden of pregnancy prevention all the time, why would it occur to men? In our culture, we just have not. And I say our culture, and I truly mean the world. I have not yet encountered a culture that is not dealing with these issues, that is not worldwide. Women are burdened with the work of pregnancy prevention. And so pointing out how bizarre it is that we never talk about men's fertility, that we just never even bring it up at all, that we have this massive birth control industry completely targeted at trying to control this tiny window of fertility for women that's unpredictable, that really can't be controlled, totally involuntary. And then we absolutely ignore the ever-present fertility of men. I mean, like, someone will say to me, well, if women are only fertile for 12 to 24 hours a month, then they should just avoid sex when they're fertile.
Right.
And of course, women don't know when they're fertile. Like there are tests, there are ways to try and gauge, there are hints that your body gives, but your ovulation can change. Even if you have a very regular menstrual cycle, your ovulation date can still change. But of course, we know when men are fertile, we never have to guess. If you're a fertile man, you're fertile every day from puberty till death. We never have to say, is it a fertile day? And so the idea that someone should avoid sex when they're fertile, then we'd basically be arguing that, well, then men can never have sex because they're fertile every day. Obviously, a ridiculous argument.
Right.
No one wants that. But yeah, it's, I've heard from many people just like you that are saying, how has this never occurred to me before? And I agree, it hadn't occurred to me either. These simple things that that really are biological facts that we just have not really considered as we discuss pregnancy prevention, abortion prevention, any of these discussions, we never talk about men's bodies, men's fertility, men's responsibility.
Right, and I completely agree. And when you say, coming from your cultural background, I have to add that it is, like you mentioned, it is very much the same in Japan as well, if not worse in some cases. So I think being able to bring this literature to Japan will be enlightening for many. And I really hope that it will give the light that it gave me to many of the readers that will be reading your book. Yes, and so continuing on, I would like to move on to the second quote that we have. It's from the same page, but two sentences that I really found to be profound. If you don't mind reading those for me.
I'd be happy to.
Mm-hmm.
When the choice is between maximizing men's pleasure or minimizing women's pain, society will predictably choose men. We can think of every instance where women are suffering, and well, it has to happen as it's making things convenient for men.
And again, this, if you really think about this, it is true. And I think you give us the example of IUDs, insertion and vasectomy, as kind of an example and comparison of men's sexual health and women's sexual health. And it really, many of my friends have gotten IUDs, and, I personally have not, but I've heard that it is one of the worst pain they've ever experienced. And I would like to also add that IUDs in Japan, we do have IUDs, but the types of IUD is different. And yes, and the size of IUD in Japan is larger than what's available. I know, in United States and our Western counterparts. So even though, it is terrible, the pain in all sizes, especially for women who's not given birth. I know that my Japanese friends, they have to go through an immense amount of pain, and I don't have male reproductive system, but I would even argue that it's probably even more painful than vasectomies.
Right.
And when you see these, imbalance between the two, and how so many women are just accepting and, just going along with it because that's just how it is. How do you feel looking at these women who may not have had the chance of reading your literature or have the chance to kind of read other feminist literatures? How do you see those women from your perspective?
This idea about our willingness to ignore women's pain, especially in the context of the medical field, is so frustrating to me. Very little makes me angrier because it's so preventable. There was just a study that came out that the New York Times has been doing a podcast about, where women were having their eggs retrieved for freezing, and they were complaining that the pain was so great. And the doctor said, no, we're administering pain medication. You must be wrong. It's not as bad as you think. Well, they came to find out that the nurse had stolen the pain medication and replaced it with just saline, just salt water.
Oh, no.
And so these women were not receiving any pain medication as they were having their eggs retrieved, a very, very painful procedure. And over and over, all these different women are telling the doctors, this is painful, something's wrong, this isn't okay. And they aren't being believed. And they were right, they were correct, because we're so willing to ignore women's pain. We see it, I bring up the example of IUDs and vasectomies in the book, as you mentioned. It's interesting because some women really have a tremendous pain with an IUD insertion and removal. They will literally pass out. They can't drive, they'll throw up. It's just so painful. Other women report it wasn't so bad, that it really, it wasn't their funnest thing, but it wasn't so painful. And of course, that makes sense. People's bodies are different. We hear the same kind of responses about childbirth. For some people, it is so, so traumatic. Other people, they're like, it was fine. So, but it's interesting because the same is probably true for men who get vasectomies. There are probably some who don't even need pain medication because maybe they wouldn't experience much pain, and others who definitely need it because they would experience a lot of pain. But we don't ever ask them that. We just assume, we say, let's be better safe than sorry. Let's make sure we give pain medication for every vasectomy. We never say, well, maybe some wouldn't feel a lot of pain, so maybe we shouldn't give any. We make sure to always give pain medication for vasectomies. But for IUD insertion, the norm is to not give any, Maybe if the woman begs and pleads, we'll offer some local anesthetic, something small, or ask them to take an ibuprofen or a small painkiller. But the standard, and this seems to be the standard with across the world with everyone that I've talked to, is to not administer pain medication for an IUD insertion and just assume that, well, some women will experience pain, but it probably won't be that bad. And yet we know story after story of women who are, again, have passed out on the table, on the exam table because they are in so much pain.
Right.
And just the assumptions we make that are so protective of men and so willing to dismiss women, it's just maddening to me. Again, especially because this is all preventable.
Right.
It's not like we don't have painkillers that would work for women. We do. We just don't think it's worth applying. It's another step. It's another hassle. We have to bring in another doctor, an anesthesiologist, or it's just one more step, and we're not willing to do it. Women can deal with the pain. That is maddening to me. And even more maddening because I'm a mother. I'm a mother of 2 sons and 4 daughters. I know that they will have procedures throughout their lives, and I know that I'm going to have to fight to make sure my daughters get the proper care. And that's really, really frustrating.
This is something that makes me very angry as well. And some of the things as I looked into this issue is that there is a medication available in the United States for morning sickness. So many women, as they get pregnant, they feel morning sickness. But that medication is not available in Japan, period. And I didn't even know that there's a medication for morning sickness. As I grew up in Japan, I just was made to believe that during pregnancy, you're not allowed to take any medication, period. And it made me so angry as many of my friends are now pregnant and having their first and second babies. And I've seen them suffer through their first and even to their second trimesters. And, it's very common in Japan that when someone becomes pregnant, they can't handle the smell of fresh rice, right? That even something that's so delicious, in my opinion, that makes them so ill. And there's this medication that's available in most other parts of the world that's not available for women in Japan. And another thing is that most majority of births in Japan are natural births. And so again, this has to do with the lack of anesthesiologists and things like this, but there aren't many things that's being done to kind of, alleviate the situation, to again, give better pain management for women. So again, I really fully agree with you that this is something that makes me so angry, because at the end of the day, it tells us that they don't care about us, right? They don't care. So again, this was really, as I was reading this, this anger was just redeveloping inside of me. So yes, it's something that I hope through this book, again, readers are reminded of this fact. So yes, and continuing on to the third quote, if you don't mind reading it.
Sure.
Yes.
Asking men to take some responsibility is not the same as allowing women to take no responsibility. How is a woman ever absolved of the outcome of an unwanted pregnancy? She isn't. She can't be.
Yes, again, you're absolutely right. No matter what the outcome is, as you write in your book, whether it be carrying the baby to full term or choosing to have an abortion or having a miscarriage, whatever it may be, if we do end up pregnant, we do have to kind of see the end of it, right? No matter what the outcome may be. And I just reading this, I think a lot of the times, men or cishet men would say things like, men have to carry the financial burden. And even that is, only limited to a few % of men out there. As you mentioned in the book, many do not pay child support, which is quite similar in Japan as well. And many do not even pay the medical fees that comes with whatever outcome this pregnancy comes out to be. So in your opinion, and I think it goes, this is similar to the question that I've received from our director, Mr. Tsuda. And I think I would like to share the question with you here, if that's okay. So he asks, men, in quotes, who are considered to be the logical sex, according to the patriarchal societal values, suddenly and conveniently lose their sense of logic when it comes to reproductive rights and health of women. First of all, why do you think this is? And second, I think men who agree with the majority of your book and what you say in the book and act accordingly still find themselves stunned with the messages like number 4, ovulation is involuntary, ejaculation is not, and number 25, men have more control over their bodies and sexual urges than we'd like to admit. And I can imagine that many men have directly tried to argue with you on this point as well. And I would like to know your perspective on the relationship between logic and sex, as well as where the lining is between the two, in your opinion.
I love the question. It's terrific. I'm going to try and answer in a couple parts. And if I forget, I'll ask you to remind me. But
no worries.
So certainly men do want to argue with me. Predominantly, that arguing has happened on Twitter, which has been very fascinating. But it has been really interesting because if a man has read the entire book, he doesn't typically argue with me. I really haven't had men come to me and say, no, this is wrong. They agree. There really isn't anything in the book that's not just, again, basic biological facts. So there's not a lot for them to argue with, because what are they going to say? That men should ejaculate irresponsibly? Like, that's a very weak argument. But the people that do want to argue, often cishet men, they maybe see one argument. They'll see where I say that men cause all unwanted pregnancies, and they think, that's impossible. And they think that's somehow that's not fair and that's not equal. And so they'll be very frustrated and they'll want to argue with me. And that's fine. I'm happy to discuss this with anyone. I have discussed it with literally thousands and thousands of men. But again, if they actually go through the arguments in the book, and it's a short book, it's very easy, extremely accessible. It's not difficult to read. It's interesting. Sometimes it's funny. It's very quick read. No one argues about it. And it's really interesting to me that how much men have embraced it. Meaning, I really think people want to be good people, men and women. They want to do the right thing. They want to be good people. There are some exceptions. I know there are some real jerks in the world, but in general, people really do want to do the right thing. And for men, this stuff just has not been pointed out. We have not asked them to think about this. We have certainly not required them to think about this. As soon as we put it in front of them and they can see it, the logic comes back into the equation. They go, oh, you're right. This makes a lot of sense. But we've never asked them to think about that. And I think one of the reasons is up until we had genetic testing and paternity testing, we could not determine who the father of a baby was.
Right.
We always knew who the mother was because we saw the baby come out of her body. So we always knew who the mother was, but historically, we never could confirm who the father was until there was genetic testing. We could assume maybe the child looks exactly like the father. So you're like, okay, it seems like it's the father. But the father at any point can say, nope, not my baby. She must have been sleeping around. We can't trust her. She's a woman. It's not my baby. And he can walk away. And we have seen that happen all over the world throughout history, where men deny their fatherhood and just walk away.
Right.
That still happens. Men often still walk away. But the difference now is we can actually track who the father is with simple tests. We can say who the father is. That's a huge difference. And I think men knowing that now and women knowing that now, I think it can really help change the conversation and say, hey, men, you don't get to ignore this anymore.
Right.
You've been able to ignore pregnancy prevention and your role, the men's role in causing unwanted pregnancies. The world has been able to ignore this, and men specifically have been able to ignore this, take all logic off the table. They don't have to think about it. They don't have to think about the days they're fertile. They don't have to think about what they're doing when they ejaculate irresponsibly. But now we're saying, well, now you do have to think about it, because we're going to know. We're going to know if you ejaculated irresponsibly. We're going to know if you caused a pregnancy and the woman didn't want that pregnancy. You can't hide it anymore.
Right.
We can find out. And so because of that, isn't it time that you took some responsibility?
I completely agree. And to that point, I think I would like to share a second question that we have from our director. He asks, around the world, I think there has been a rise in awareness for consensual sex, and new laws are being created to criminalize non-consensual sex. However, as I have read the book, I realize that is just not enough. As the next step, there needs to be consent that encompasses responsible ejaculation, as you give in the example in the book, such as using condoms. And unless this is realized, this problem is in its entirety cannot be solved. This point, in my opinion, is the core message of this book, and it must become part of sex education. How do you think we can bring this sort of enlightenment to everyone in the world, especially the cishet men?
I agree. I just want to start with, I totally agree with your director. It's a great observation. I think it's exactly right. We talk about consensual sex. It's so important. It's so wonderful. But there's also this consent to pregnancy. Like, just because a woman says, yes, I want to have sex, does not mean she wants to become pregnant.
Right.
And there are so many simple, easy things for men that they can do to prevent pregnancy, to ejaculate responsibly. And of course, this is a self-promoting answer, but one thing I want to see happen is for the ideas in this book to become part of the cultural conversation. So I want people to read this book. I think we also need, there are some people that just aren't going to read. Understand that they just don't want to pick up a book. So I'd love to see some videos, maybe sort of an animated, series that teaches the ideas in this book. I want these ideas to just reach a wide audience, because we need people talking about this. Anytime we're trying to do like major cultural change, we just have to talk about it so much. In the US, the examples I can think of from my lifetime is a huge shift in how we think about smoking. When I was a child, you could smoke on airplanes and in every restaurant everywhere, and now it's can't. And another cultural shift I was able to see was seatbelts. When I was growing up, no one wore seatbelts. As a child, like, it just wasn't a thing. About the time I was 16 years old and getting my own driver's license, laws started being enacted where seatbelts were required, and it was a huge cultural shift. I'm sure there are examples that you've seen in Japan as well, where just and what happens is people are talking about it. You have to talk about it. There has to be advertisements about it, books about it. People have to talk about it. We need to see them talking about it on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and everywhere. And they are like, we're seeing it, and that's exciting. And we need just more of it. The other thing that needs to happen is young men who are learning about their own responsibilities. And we really do need to think about young men here, and who are starting their sex lives and trying to figure out how this whole world works. They don't want to hear from me. I am this white middle-aged lady in America. Like, they're like, they don't want to hear from me. They want to hear from a man they trust. Maybe it's an older friend, an uncle, a brother, a father. I don't know who it is in their life, but someone that they trust. And if older men who have learned how to ejaculate responsibly, who know how to use condoms, who have figured out how to make sure condoms are comfortable and that they have the right size, or have gotten a vasectomy, which I'm just a huge fan of, and we need to really be talking about vasectomies. If they hear it from men, they're much more likely to internalize that, what they're hearing, and to make it a part of their lives. So so this needs to be a wide campaign of talking about sexual responsibility. And we need men to be part of that. We need men to first say, I will ejaculate responsibly. I myself personally am going to ejaculate responsibly. And then second, we need men to say, and I'm going to help other men know that they need to ejaculate responsibly. That's where it needs to come from. We see vasectomies go up, up, up when other men talk about vasectomies. When men who have had vasectomies say, it's great, it's improved my sex life, it makes things so much easier, less stress, then we see vasectomies rise. When men are not talking about it, when they're keeping it quiet and private, which I understand it's a private thing, but it affects the whole culture. It's important that we talk about it openly. But when they're not talking about it, then we don't see an increase. We don't see an improvement. So we do need to have open discussions about these things. It helps everyone.
Thank you so much. And I think with that, I would like to ask, it's a bit out of order, but the question 4 that I had in mind is that I personally grew up in the United States. And so even though, as you write in your book, I did have an abstinence-based sexual education, I still did have a sexual education. And added to this, my mother was a very avid fighter in providing the right knowledge for her daughter. So I am a very privileged, speaking from the perspective that I did have enough knowledge as a pubescent girl to kind of make an educated decision for myself about my body. And I think that created a good ground growing into an adult woman to sexual decisions that I made up until this point. But that is not something that I can say for the fellow Japanese people who did not have enough sexual education in during their education in elementary, middle school, and high school. So they pretty much, not just boys, but mostly, you know, boys, as you know, as I'm going to talk about pornography here, it is catered towards the male audience. Many of us in Japan, their first encounter with sex is through pornography. And so I kind of wanted to ask you this question. As a result of failed education in Japan, many boys are introduced to sex through pornography. And how can we start a conversation about responsible ejaculation to men who still to this day source their knowledge from porn? And as you and I probably both know, that pornography is probably not the best place to learn about consensual sex or learn about responsible ejaculation. So how do you think we can approach this in a very this environment in Japan where many men still to this day are very much believing that what they see in pornography is how sex is, which is obviously not true.
Yeah, it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating because it really leads to so much harm. It can lead to harm because sometimes what's depicted in pornography, not always, but it's not unusual either, is really harmful to women. And so then this plays out in real lives where women are being choked or beaten and expected to enjoy it somehow. It's so bizarre. It's really, really awful. And then also just leading to really dissatisfying sex lives for everybody, which is it's dissatisfying for both the men and the women, because of course they can't have this thing from the pornography, which is pretend, which was acting, which is totally pretend. It's really, really frustrating. Of course, education is the answer. We know this. And if there's not a program in place, it's frustrating. I would love to see people meet these young men where they are. If they're watching videos, how do we create videos that are teaching how to do this, that would be appealing to them? Who would be the creators? You know, who are vloggers, who are TikTokers that they respect, that they are watching, that could introduce some of these ideas? How do we make that happen? The other thing to think about is the pornography industry also has a role in this. If they're providing a product, how much responsibility do they have to teach correctly? Should there be a series of pornography that's like, this is real life sex now? You've watched the fantasy sex that's not real. This is what real life sex looks like. And these are the consent questions you need to ask. And this is what it means to use a condom. And this is what it means to ejaculate responsibly. What should they be required to provide? If they are doing harm in the community, should they be required to combat that harm? And what, and what can happen there? So I think we can think about this in, like in really practical terms, like, okay, if these young men are being educated through pornography, how do we make better pornography that can teach them, if that's what's happening? Or do we, again, need to say, no, we want to focus on nationwide, throughout Japan, throughout the schools, sex ed that's part of the science and biology curriculum? And can we do fact-based at every grade level? We know this works. In the US, it's, as you know, it's so different state to state, school to school. There is nothing uniform about it.
Right.
But in countries where they have done it, I'm thinking of the Netherlands, of Holland, they have excellent sex ed there. And it's, and they have it at every grade level, starting from young throughout, and it's all just so normalized. They know the proper names for all the body parts. They know how sex works. They don't have, there's not like mystery. They can ask questions of their teachers and their parents, and it's just talked about, again, in an age appropriate way. We're not talking about in-depth sexual exploration that a kindergartner doesn't need to know about. Is all age appropriate, but it just keeps things so normalized. And what the effect is, the fear is that by doing so, that teenagers will have more sex or more unsafe sex. The opposite is true. With education, it means that they often delay having sex longer, that they're more responsible when they do have sex, that they take it seriously, that they, that they really only engage in sex when they want to, that they don't feel pressured. There's far fewer unwanted pregnancies, like that drops dramatically just by educating. And so being able to go to the community, the country, the culture, and say, if you're troubled that boys are getting their sex ed from porn, then we need real sex ed programs. So if you're going to say that, hey, this is a problem, they shouldn't be getting their sex ed from porn, then what are you replacing that with? We need real sex ed programs. And we need to fund those, and we need to take those seriously. And there are so many benefits to that. And I think we really, anytime we're hearing politicians or government decrying porn, decrying abortion, decrying, like really, lecturing on all these things, we have to go back to them and say, whoa, all of these things are solvable. So what are you suggesting? What kind of free and accessible birth control programs are you suggesting? What are you doing to bring more birth control options to our community? What are you doing to provide sex ed? Do not lecture us on abortion. Do not lecture us on birth control when you're not doing your part, and you're trying to make it harder to access birth control, which is, from what I understand, is what's happening in Japan. So many birth control options not available, or really difficult to get. That's a problem.
Exactly. I think to really prove your point, Japan believes in not waking up the sleeping child policy, is that, if you don't teach children about sex, then they're not going to have sex, which, as you know, is absolutely not true. And I think Japan right now currently is experiencing a record number of syphilis in our population. And it just really goes to show, without education, it's basically you're inflicting harm upon children, because how could they know, right? If they're not taught that, wearing condom not only prevents pregnancy, but also, STIs and, all these kind of viruses, they're really not going to have that means, an educated decision to be able to protect themselves.
Yes.
So I completely agree that this myth of, not if you don't tell them about it, they're not going to do it is absolutely not true, because obviously, as we've seen, they are going to get the information, and when they do, they're going to get it from sources like very fictional pornography. So this is a very concern of mine that I have, and I really hope that this book will start this conversation to kind of bring this like drastic change in the discussion. And added to this this factor of myth, I kind of want to touch on vasectomy, which as I lived both in the United States and Japan, and I've studied in England as well. I personally believe that this talk on vasectomy is much more common in the Western countries. When I was given the opportunity to speak with you, I actually went on multiple websites of hospitals in Japan that actually do vasectomy surgeries.
Amazing.
Because I, to be honest with you, I really didn't have that much knowledge on it. And so when I first, before going into the website, what I had in mind was that vasectomies are not reversible, and whatever vasectomies that were given in United States must be different to the one in Japan, because I often hear vasectomies are not reversible, and once you get it, you can it's very unlikely that you'll be able to have your own children. So going into it, I was like, just like the IUD example, I was like, maybe there's some different medical procedures, as I often see in Japan, that maybe it's different, so that maybe the technology hasn't gotten to Japan yet. And again, I'm not a doctor, so if there's any medical professional in the audience, I'm not here to give a lecture on vasectomy. But as I found, is that majority of vasectomies done in Japan and United States are pretty much the same. And so the reversal rate is pretty much the same. I think in United States, the stats I found was like anywhere between 60 to 95%. And as I read in the Japanese website was like somewhere like, 65 to 90%. So, pretty much the same. So going in, I already found myself astonished that, wow, I thought vasectomies, at least in Japan, were different to the ones in the United States and England, and that they are not reversible. And I found myself to be dumbfounded, because, it pretty much is reversible. And another interesting thing I found on the website is that, when you go onto these websites and you look up vasectomies, they have like pictures of, I guess, potential, people coming in to talk about getting the procedure. And most all of the pictures they used on these websites were old men, right? So these were, married men, who had the discsion with their wife. And that's one way to go. I'm not saying that I deny that group of people, but it's like your men in your 60s, 50s and 60s who's done having kids with their wife, and that's when they go into forever tie the tubes and not have children. So the idea of it being irreversible is very much there. So until you get to your 50s and 60s and you for sure don't want any children, you don't get a vasectomy, and that's a big if, right? I, at least in Japan, I've never ever met someone who's around my age or younger who talks about getting a vasectomy with getting it reversed in their mind in later years of their life. And I found myself to be like, wow, okay, I didn't really realize that it was a completely same procedure. I gave men an excuse, right? Oh, I shouldn't really
must be different,
right? I shouldn't really demand them to get this, very invasive procedure, and I should just suck it up and take the pill every day, right? Or get an implant or get an IUD or whatever it may be. So again, I think even around vasectomy, there's myths, right? That's kind of cultivated that works in favor of men to not get it.
Always.
Right?
Always.
So it's like, oh, an IUD is just you put it in and you take it out. Not a big deal. But vasectomy, oh my God, once you get it, then that's it, right? No more children. And what do you think about these myths, right? That kind of, it's pretty intentional, right? Because I'm pretty sure it comes with intent of not getting it. And
Right.
so this myth of vasectomies being irreversible, or even if it's reversed, this likelihood of producing for children is very unlikely. Sperm is unlikely. First, why do you think these myths even pop up? And second, because it's such a widely accepted myth, how do you think we can tackle these myths and kind of correct it with the correct information and so on and so forth?
Well, I love talking about vasectomies. I'm a huge fan,
Yes,
so I'm really
I love
happy that you brought
vasectomy
us up.
t-shirts. Yes,
Yeah.
I love those. Yes.
I'm so glad you brought it up. So it really is a cultural thing. It's been fascinating. I live in France right now. Vasectomies are not popular here.
Okay.
If you go talk to your doctor about it, apparently, and I hope I'm getting this correct, apparently there's you have to have a 3-month wait.
Wow.
Before,
Okay.
after you talk to your doctor, you have to have a waiting period to just make sure you really want this.
Wow.
They take it very seriously. But then I've heard, and this is all anecdotal, of course, but I've heard in Australia that it's very easy, that people get vasectomy, no problem. You can basically walk into a clinic and get one that day. So it really is a cultural thing.
Right.
Every country kind of decides how they're going to approach vasectomy. I think so many of the myths truly are a way to protect men. We really like to protect men, not just protect them from harm, but protect their freedoms. So, hey, we don't want to limit, what if a man decides he wants to have a baby, when he's 80, and wants to impregnate someone, or what if he divorces his wife and marries a younger wife and now wants to have babies with her? We don't want to ever limit what men can do. And so I think we say, oh, well, we'd rather limit what women can do. Women can get a tubal ligation. We don't need, even though it's much more invasive than a vasectomy, it's much more difficult. We're not going to encourage vasectomies for men. So I think it is very intentional, although maybe it's in our subconscious that we're oh, we're not going to ask men to do that. But the reality is, it is a much simpler procedure than almost anything women can do. And if you hear, and it should be far more popular. I do want to say, we should consider it permanent. People do it because they want to stop having babies. And so we should consider it permanent. And I want to be clear that the vast majority of people who get vasectomies never want to get it reversed. They are glad that it's permanent. They don't want to impregnate anyone. So I'm glad that it's effective. It's good that people don't want to get it reversed. That's wonderful. For the few that do want to get it reversed, because life changes, things happen. The stats are getting better and better. This is no longer the same vasectomies of the 1970s.
Right.
Things really have improved. So at medical centers, the top medical centers in the US, like Stanford, which is a big medical center in California, there's one in Arizona that does vasectomies. They have reversal rates of successful reversal rates of 99%, of 95%. And that's even if the vasectomy was 20 years ago. It doesn't matter how long ago the vasectomy was. So that's great news for the world, because it just means our technologies are getting better, our skills and techniques are getting better. And if it really becomes a thing where there's a lot of demand for vasectomy reversal, there'll be a lot of great doctors that can do that, that will, want to provide that service if there's a really demand for that. There hasn't been a big demand for that. There hasn't been a big demand for reversals. So the reversal rates are not amazing. They might be 76%, for across the board, because there aren't a lot of doctors that have to do this, because again, most people don't want to get them reversed. But I would love, love, love to see these techniques and skills become so commonplace that a young man, maybe he's 25, can go in and say, yes, I'd like a vasectomy now, and I know I'd like to get it reversed when I'm 35. Great. And I don't think we're quite there yet. If you're wealthy and can afford a great doctor, then, and you can fly to wherever you need to get that medical care, great, then you can do that. But for the average person, they're not going to be able to afford going to find the best doctor to do a reversal. So, but all that says to me is that, okay, well, we need to train doctors. If this is something that again, there's a demand for. If there are young men saying, no, we want vasectomies and then we want to get them reversed, then the medical community has the skills to do that. They need to teach more. They need to, make sure the best skills are being taught and that more urologists can perform these procedures so that people can expect that that's an option. But the reality is the body, even with the vasectomy, the body's still producing sperm. A doctor can go in and extract that sperm, even if he can't reconnect the vasectomy. Men can freeze their sperm if they're worried. I mean, you have options. So if you're pretty sure that you're never going to want to impregnate someone again or ever, a vasectomy is a great option, and it's a simple procedure and requires, from all the data we have, certainly less trauma than a tubal ligation, but for a lot of men, far less trauma even than an IUD, which is not a permanent, option. So I'm a big fan of vasectomies. I think we need to talk about them. The other thing that until you have them, you don't realize, in couples who have been dealing with birth control for a decade, 2 decades, and they're done having kids. Like my husband, for example, got a vasectomy in our 30s. Which sounds like is young for Japan. It is such an improvement on your sex life. It's such an improvement. And people don't understand that until they've experienced it. But basically it takes all this pressure away, all this pressure, this worry of, will I become pregnant? What will I do if I become pregnant? Is my birth control prescription up to date? Do I need more pills? Or, did I skip a day and now it's in effect? Or, like just all the worry around birth control. Is it time to get a new shot? Is my IUD working? All these things that is just this worry, they just disappear. And it takes this huge burden off of women's shoulders, and just makes for a much more enjoyable sex life for both partners. So I think we can also work on the like PR, of vasectomies, like
the positive side,
and make sure the positive side, like it's going to improve your life so much. And for both people in this partnership, and for men who worry that they're going to be tricked into a pregnancy where they're going to have to provide, for this child, which is also its own weird myth, but whatever. This also relieves them. They know they didn't cause it. They had a vasectomy or whatever. So I really think it's that I want to see more and more interest in vasectomy. There has been more and more interest lately, but we want even more, because we also want doctors to be able to say, I can give you a vasectomy and reverse it. I'm confident I can do it. Like, we want it to be so easy for men to get a vasectomy, and so easy for the few that want to get it reversed, that they can just confidently make this decision. And I think we're getting closer and closer to that, and that makes me really, really happy.
I think so too. In my personal experience, I think I've heard many more younger men in English-speaking parts of the world that they are willing and wanting to get vasectomies, especially after having a couple of children. So I really do hope that I see that in Japan as well, and hopefully I see more younger men on the pages of vasectomy.
On those ads, yes.
And so I think we've talked a lot about differences in culture, and I think before we continue on to other questions, I kind of want to touch on the subject on how you mentioned that you are a mother of 6, as well as being a Mormon, when you wrote the Twitter thread, the original Twitter thread that gave birth to this wonderful book. And I asked this because I personally, because I grew up in the United States, I can understand the relationship between the issue of abortion in the United States and religion. But I think that's a little bit foreign to our Japanese audience. So if you could explain why you intentionally put your religious information to your original Twitter thread, I think they would really appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah. So it was a very intentional decision. I chose to include, I was always going to include that I was a mother of 6 because it gives me some authority. Obviously, I've had experience with pregnancy and childbirth, and so that gives me some authority. But I also mentioned that I was religious because in the U.S., there's going to be an assumption made that if I'm a Mormon, that I'm going to be anti-abortion and that I'm going to be very politically conservative. That's the assumption people will make. Of course, there are millions and millions of Mormons and other religious people, and they don't all believe the same things because that's millions of people.
Right.
And in my case, I'm politically progressive and I'm very pro-choice and not anti-abortion at all. But I knew that if I included that information, that people would make an assumption, and I hoped that that would mean that I could reach more people, that people that would normally say, I don't want to read what she has to say, I think I'm going to disagree with her, that they would be more willing to read what I wrote. And it is true. I have had people across the political spectrum and across the religious spectrum in the US say they've read the book, they agree with it, and they're excited about it. There was a Republican politician in South Carolina, a very conservative state, and she's part of the conservative political party, and she read from the book in the state legislature to her colleagues because she is totally agrees with it. And it's what it's done. What this book has done is, if abortion is a emotional issue to talk about in your community or in your family, this book takes the emotion out of it, because the emotional thing that people discuss is the baby. Is it a baby? When is it a baby? When is it a fetus? When does life begin? These are some of the big debates in the US for sure, and in other parts of the world as well. And this book shifts the conversation, because instead of talking about the baby, we're talking about pregnancy prevention.
Right.
So there is no baby. We prevented the pregnancy. And so it's much easier to talk about practical solutions and what we can do to change the conversation when we're not just stuck in this emotional debate where we're never going to agree, because these are not just emotional debates, they're philosophical debates, they're religious debates. There is no one answer. And if we shift the conversation to prevention, it makes everything easier and makes everything feel like there's a solution. I mean, it makes clear that there is a solution, not just feel like there's a solution. So that's why I included religion in my introduction, because one, I wanted to get more readers, but also because I truly am part of a religious community, and I know how religious people talk about abortion and about these topics. And so I know where their heads are, even though I disagree with them. And so I felt like I could talk to them from a place they would understand.
Right.
And I think that has been true.
I think I read in other interviews that you gave that you said that you don't even talk about abortion in this book. And I think that's really true, because you're really going back to its roots, and that if you do not ejaculate into a vagina, then there would be no abortions to have, right? If you don't conceive, then you wouldn't have an abortion. So I think it's really interesting that you talk about, you really focus on biology in this book, and that you don't let them go into this emotional rhetoric that they really tactically like to go into. So again, I think we really talked about how this book has affected, the reactions that you've gotten in, as you've spoken in the Anglosphere. And I really like to go into how you might anticipate when we bring this book into Japan, which is a very different cultural sphere. I've spoken bits and parts about my experience in Japan as well. What are some things that you anticipate from this introduction of this book into Japan?
Well, I really hope that that people will read it and have their minds shifted, that they will have a similar reaction to you have, where you're like, whoa, I've never thought of these things. I really, really hope they'll have that reaction. I also hope that women especially will be able to use this book as a tool that will give them the language they need to talk with their partners about birth control who's doing the work of birth control. I mean, who's doing the work of pregnancy prevention, how they can share that burden together. So I really hope it'll empower women that way. I hope it will empower men to understand that they have a role in this, that when we're talking about some of these issues, we often want to leave men out of it and say, this is a woman's issue. And this book brings men right back in and says, hey, this is your role too. This is how you can be part of this conversation. So I hope men will feel empowered to say, hey, I can take a role in this. I can ejaculate responsibly. I can talk to other men about using condoms. I can get a vasectomy, talk to other men about getting vasectomies. I can, if I am in a position that I can influence the cost of these things, or, are there free, can I create free programs for condoms and vasectomies? What can I do to influence things? I think that would be amazing. I do hope, I anticipate people will want to argue with it, because it's a really bold thing to say that men cause all unwanted pregnancies. Because the arguing, it just continues the conversation, right? The arguing makes sure we're talking about it. And I'm so confident in these arguments that I've created that I will accept any argument. Like, come at me, say whatever you want. I am very confident that I have a good answer for you, and that that I have information, and that I have science on my side, and that I can discuss things with you, and maybe even convert you to my way of thinking. I really, really hope that it also, I don't know, the impression I get about what's happening in Japan, and you can tell me if this is true or not, is that there's almost an infantilizing, I'm not even sure how to say it, of women, where it's like, women can't make these decisions about their bodies and these medicines, and we have to make these decisions for women. So you're infantilizing women, and yet these same women you think should be mothers, you think they are too childlike or too irresponsible to make decisions about their bodies, but at the same time you think they're competent enough to be mothers. It doesn't make any sense. And so I hope, and that's not just in Japan, I see this happening in lots of places. So I don't want to, point a finger, but I do hope that this book will help women just feel like, hey, we are responsible with our bodies. We are already preventing so many pregnancies every year, so many people taking birth control, so many women preventing pregnancy. We are already taking responsibility. We are already showing that we're responsible. We'd like men to take responsibility for men's bodies. Women, I hope women will continue taking responsibility for women's bodies. I certainly want that to happen. I want women to take great care of their bodies. I know women do that already. What we're asking for is men to take care of men's bodies. And I would like to, so again, if they want to argue, fine with me, because it keeps this in the conversation, keeps the conversation in the culture. And that's what needs to happen. And there is nothing they can say to me. There's no argument that they're going to bring that I have not already seen on Twitter, I promise. And so again, I'm very confident, and I hope people feel like they can use this book as a tool, both men and women, to have these conversations, to say, why don't we have better sex ed? What is happening here? Why don't we have better birth control options? Why are we making it so hard to prevent pregnancy? Why don't we let people make decisions for their own bodies? And I want to be clear that people who use birth control, and people who have abortions, they're typically parents. These are the people that have had a baby. This is not, these decisions don't prevent people from having babies ever. They just allow people the control of when they want to become a parent. That's beautiful. I mean, I got to choose when I had my children, all 6. It would seem like I don't know anything about birth control since I have 6 kids, but actually I have used all the different birth controls and was so grateful for them. even when I struggled, even when there were side effects, I was so grateful for them, because it's so important that women get to choose when they become parents. Women and men, ideally, working together, that this is a choice that you can make together. And it's so important to be able to have that control of getting to choose when you become a parent. It affects everything. It affects the outcome of the children. It affects the whole cultures. It affects economic systems. You know, it affects everything, and it's really important. So, I hope Japan will love the book. I hope it will cause some maybe some drama, so that people will talk about this. And I hope there are debates, and I hope that there are plenty of people saying this is not true, and other people saying this is why it is true, and that people talk about it, because the more people are talking about it, the more likely men will ejaculate responsibly. And it's really hard to be faced with this information as a man, to look at it and you know, and look at some of these biological facts, look at the fact that ejaculation is voluntary while ovulation is involuntary, you know, like to look at fertility numbers, and to not go, oh, if I don't want to cause a pregnancy, it's really easy for me not to cause a pregnancy. Men can prevent unwanted pregnancies so easily. And ejaculating responsibly is always an option. It's easy. They're unless they're being raped, they always have the option to ejaculate responsibly. And once men understand that, then they act more responsibly, which is great. So that's what we want to see happen.
Love that. I think we're coming up to an end here, but I think this is one of the first instances you have a chance to connect with your Japanese readers. So I'm really excited to see their reaction and, what they have to say about the book. And I'm sure, because it's going to be taken in a different cultural context, I feel like there's going to be new findings. Hopefully for you as well. So I'd like to take this last moment for you to kind of speak to our audience directly. If you have any message towards our Japanese audience, I would like for you to kind of use this platform and speak to them, if that's okay with you.
Yes, I'm so excited the book is coming to Japan. I hope you'll read it. I hope you'll share it. I kept the book really short, so you can keep it in your, it's lightweight, you can keep it in your bag, read it, hand it off to someone else. What I would love to do is, I would love your feedback. If you read it and you think of more ideas, you're like, oh, here's additional research that supports these ideas or actually contrasts with these ideas. I would love to know it. I'm easy to reach out to on Twitter, I'm on Instagram. If you have things you want to share, I don't speak Japanese, but there are great translation tools. So I'm happy to communicate with you the best that I can. I every time the book goes into a new culture, I benefit because I learn. I want to hear your experiences. I want to hear what kind of conversations you're having with your boyfriends and partners, and and the men in your life. If you're a man reading this, I want to hear which parts made you want to argue with me, and which parts you instantly agreed with. I would love to hear all of this, because these conversations are so important to me. That I sincerely want to see cultural change happen around pregnancy prevention. And so I want to hear your experiences. I want to hear what you have to say. The more I hear, the more I learn. And I really do hope I just hope people discuss this. I don't know what the book club culture is like in Japan, but if there is a book club culture, this is a great book for that. It introduces the most interesting conversations. Everyone has something to add. It's really short, as I've mentioned, and so it's easy for people to participate. Think about and really think about who is influencing the young people in Japan, and how do we get this book into the hands of those influential people so that they are communicating these messages to the younger people. Anyway, I'm so glad it's coming to you. I hope you'll read it. Ever since the Twitter Twitter thread came out, the original Twitter thread, which was back in 2018, I have heard from people in Japan who have asked for this in Japanese. And so I'm so glad it's coming. I hope it will be a helpful tool to you. And I can't wait to hear what you think. And if you disagree, if you agree, I want to hear all of it. Please let me know what you think. And I'm happy to discuss with you.
Thank you so much. Yes, and I personally would love to recommend this book to our fellow audience and love the idea about the book club. I think the book club culture is starting to bloom in Japan. So I personally would love to recommend this book to our fellow audience. And it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for making your time to come to our show today. It's been very much a learning experience for myself as well. So I'm really excited to see how this book will bloom in the Japanese language sphere. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I love the questions. I really appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope we'll see you soon again in Japan.
I hope so too. I hope so too.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Oh, I just am realizing I forgot to mention that.
Yes.
I'm sure you know this, that when it was first announced in Japan that it was hitting like bestseller on Amazon in categories or whatever.
Yes.
Anyway, so that's so great.
Congratulations. Yes, I think the audience is already very excited to have their hands on this book, and I am as well. So I read it in English, and I'll read it again in Japanese. So.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
You too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. はい、本日はですね、写生責任の著者であるブレアさんをお迎えして、直接お話しできる機会をいただきました。本の内容がですね、割と本当に専門的で、ただただ科学的事実に基づくものだったんですが、ブレアさん本人はとても気さくな方で、真剣な内容であるとともにカジュアルにこのようなお話ができたっていうことは大変有益な時間だったんじゃないかなっていうふうに思っております。彼女のこの気さくな人柄と本の内容を皆様にお届けできたこととても嬉しく思います。ぜひこの機会にですね、皆様も写生責任をご購入いただいて、私の方にもですね、どのようなご感想をお持ちになったか教えていただけるととても嬉しいです。本日はどうもありがとうございました。